You're good.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I need a motion to approve the agenda for the budget meeting of March 3rd, 2025.
Eric and Kelly.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And that brings us to open forum. The Greenville Central School District wishes to facilitate public access to meetings of the Board of Education and to provide an opportunity for public comment at these meetings. Accordingly, the open forum provides an opportunity for members of the public to share thoughts about topics on the agenda. An individual's comments shall be limited to 5 minutes. Additionally, comments may be emailed to the district clerk, Daphne Pearson, using email pearsond@greenvillecsd.org. In order for an email to be read during the meeting, it must be received by 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting and state that the email is to be read out loud. Emails shall be limited to 600 words. Please note that this is not the time to register complaints that need to be addressed confidentially through the proper channels. Remarks that may be considered defamatory, obscene, profane, stigmatizing, or otherwise impermissible in public forums are prohibited and will be declared out of order. Board members actively listen during open forum but may not immediately respond to comments. Does anybody wish to speak? Okay.
I
Can you
have
come
a
up and
question.
use the microphone?
I'm
Thank you.
I'm going to have a hard time myself.
You're getting company, right?
I have a question actually for Todd about the surplus in the kitchen cafeteria account and what happens to that at the end of a school year.
In terms of the funds,
Yes.
so they stay in fund balance for cafeteria. It's a separate account for cafeteria that has, I think it's like a savings account for cafeteria.
Is there rules as to what can get paid out of that account as far as salaries or?
The rule is it has to be anything for food service. So it could go towards salaries, it could go towards equipment for food service, anything that would be paid for out of the food service program.
Thank you.
Here.
Thanks, Rich.
Anyone else? Okay. No?
No.
That brings us to Todd with his budget update.
I feel like it's more than budget update. The budget, the
Presentation.
next phase of the budget presentation. So tonight, the slides that we're going to start with look similar to, or they are the same slides we use at the beginning of each presentation. So bear with us as we go through and kind of set the stage. This first one being our district mission and goals, making sure that all the conversations we have around budget and the decisions that we're making with budget and fiscal are in line with what we're trying to do at a district level for our mission and goals. We want to make sure we always ground this work in the mission and goals. Our budget timeline, so we are already into March. So in March, tonight is the capital administrative components, so the other 2 components of the budget. The program component is what folks heard last Monday. And then also tonight, we're going to be looking at the revenues and where revenues stand currently for next year's budget. The other items that happen throughout the month of March, obviously this is early in the month of March, but the things that continue to happen throughout this month are really things that have already started in the budget process. So that continual review of the priorities that we've established and where our budget stands. Reviewing state aid figures. So we have the executive budget from the governor, waiting for the 2-house budget to come out from the legislature to see where those numbers stand. Reviewing a fund balance and determining where the tax levy increase is set. So that's a preview of what's to come throughout the month of March. Our big decision points. So in tonight's presentation, we will actually touch on all 3 of these major decision points. The first one being that manage overall program and staffing. So what are we looking for program and staffing next year? The tax levy and what we are looking to increase it for next year to balance the budget, as well as on the bottom, that fund balance and where we stand currently with fund balance and what is included in next year's revenue from fund balance. So tonight we're at that point with the other two components in revenue that we're really touching on all three of these big decision points within the budget process. And the last slide that should look familiar is our overall budget formula. Again, tonight you see a whole bunch of these boxes are shaded in because we're touching on where we are within the budget priorities we've established, some budget modifications from the rollover budget to the preliminary budget that we presented last week to the preliminary budget that's being presented tonight. We're also talking about those revenues, as I mentioned, as well as fund balance and reserves. All those go together to eventually turn into what will be the proposed budget for voters in May. So specific tonight, as I mentioned, we have the other two components. New York State requires that we break the budget into the three components. Program is what we saw last week with the administrative team. Tonight we're going to talk about capital and administrative components and then move into revenues. And then we'll finish up tonight looking at overall where we stand with the preliminary budget and what is next. What are the next steps and upcoming dates? So we're going to start with the capital component. Oh, before I do that, actually, one other item just to touch base at the beginning. In terms of documents for tonight, there's the slide deck that has the information that we're presenting up on the screen tonight. And then there's several supporting documents, one for the capital component, one for the administrative component, one for revenue, and then there's an overall preliminary budget as it stands as of today that shows all the individual budget codes and any changes from rollover to last week to this week. So just forgot to mention that. All right, so on the capital component. So this includes buildings and grounds, judgment and claims, and debt service for everything from bus purchases as well as capital projects. All go into the capital component. So that's what we're talking about for this first section tonight. So we're going to start with buildings and grounds. So I'm going to turn it over to Rich to speak specifically to this slide and buildings and grounds requests for next year.
Good evening, everyone. First thing in there is equipment. The equipment code, we're going to drop $4,000. What I'd like to do is trade in our model tractor for another model tractor and get a varnisher and a paint sprayer for the liner for the fields. That's what I'd like to do with the equipment money. Our contractual expenses are up $10,800, which is 1.27. With that, because of the rise, we're moving the elementary school over to propane next year. They're putting in new propane boilers. I took money out of the fuel, number 2 fuel oil, to put it into propane, but I added another $5,000 onto that because we're not really sure how much propane we're going to be using. I did a calculation that I got online, and we should be really close, and we should save money too. The other things in that were the asbestos triennial inspection and the fire system service. Materials and supplies, we're going to keep that the same this year, so the 0%. And BOE services is down 1.25%, with an overall total of the budget going up 0.6%. Waiting on the top personnel. We're going to add a 1 nighttime cleaner to the budget. We've added another around 3,000 square feet with the new gym and new art room and everything. So with the new configuration at the elementary school, one more person is going to be needed to do the cleaning down there. That's all I have for that slide. Any questions?
I have a question about that. So if you add a nighttime cleaner, that's for the elementary school?
It'll probably be split, 75-25, something like that. We also have the fitness center that's being used more now that gets done 2 to 3 days a week, but it's not done every night. So that would incorporate that also.
Okay, thank you, Rich. All Right. Other items that fall under the capital side of the budget is judgment and claims and refund of property taxes. So these are areas that we're not looking for any increase for next year, small amounts overall, keeping them the same as current year. So 0% increase in these areas. And then another on the capital side is our school resource officer. So we continue to partner with Greene County Sheriff's Office and have a resource officer on campus every day that school is in session. So this increase comes from Greene County Sheriff in terms of them projecting what salary costs will be for next year. So there is a 3% increase in this area to maintain our school resource officer program.
I have a question.
Yep.
Is that 3% negotiated each year, or is it just already in a contract with the state?
Good question.
I believe
I think I asked the same thing last year, and they said it was contractual through the county, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
On the interfund transfer side, so this would be an interfund transfer to capital. This would be if we had a small capital outlay project that was happening during the school year. So an example of this would be several years ago, we did 2 of the elementary classrooms during the regular school year, or during the general fund budget, and it came from this budget line where we budget a specific amount for the purpose of transferring it to capital for a small capital project. At this time, with the large capital project ongoing, we're not looking to do any small project next year, so this amount would remain at 0 for the 25-26 school year. And the last slide on the capital component is the debt service. So this is a significant portion of the capital side of the budget. This includes everything from bus purchases when we borrow money to purchase buses, as well as borrowing money for capital projects, and then the interest that goes along with any of that borrowing. So just to highlight, this was mentioned at a previous presentation, specifically our current capital project, the importance of it being completed by the end of this calendar year. So by December, we will be submitting our final cost reports to the state. And the critical piece there is by doing that by December, we get a full year worth of aid on that project in the 25-26 school year. So on this side, we're seeing where we have to start paying for the money that we're going to be borrowing this June for the capital project. So the increase on the capital project principal as well as the capital project interest, those two numbers, the majority of that is coming specifically from this current capital project and the money that we will borrow and then start paying back during the 25-26 school year. Also just want to note on the bottom there where it says band interest, it went from $400,000 in this current year to 0 next year. So that was again connected to this current capital project. For the project that is happening right now, we had a capital reserve of approximately $2.6 million. We started the project by spending down that money. We had that money basically in the savings account. So we wanted to spend down the money that we had first. But we knew that within this current year, 24-25, we were going to have to start borrowing money in the form of a ban to hold over until the project was done. So in this current year, we budgeted $400,000 specifically to pay the interest on the money that we borrowed during this school year. Next year, with that ban becoming a bond, so borrowing a large sum of money for the purpose of the project being completed, that money shifts up into the capital project principal and the capital project interest. So just when you see that, oh my gosh, we had $400,000 this year and nothing next year, well, it's all related to the project and the design of the current project. Any questions about the capital component?
I'm sorry, I'm still trying to make my head wrap around it. So when we get the aid back, what does that address on this slide? And I know it's revenue, but what is it balancing out over here?
Good question. So it is balancing out the increase that it's in 2 spots up here. So it's on capital projects principal. If you look at the increase column, it's $384,500. As well as capital projects interest, the increase column is $816,054.
So if we get in by December 31st, what we get from the state will equal those 2 columns.
Not exactly, because also in there, the capital project principal are all capital projects that we are currently paying principal payments to. Those principal payments change slightly year to year, as does the interest. The vast majority of that increase is coming from the current capital project turning into payments. So it's not an exact, like, that number equals what we're getting from the state. If I were to pull it apart and look specifically at what we are paying in addition next year because of the project and what we're getting back, those two numbers are very closely lined up. Good question. Anything else on the capital side? The third and final component that we break the budget into is the administrative component. So the administrative component is made up of professional staff who spend 50% or more of their time in administration and supervision, the clerical staff related to those positions, and then items that are district-wide like central printing, planning and evaluation, some data work that we get through Questar, as well as curriculum development. So broad category that goes into the administrative component. So looking at the administrative component overall for contractual expenses, there's an increase here of 11.73%. So the budget lines that go into those contractual expenses include our insurance policies, our auditing services, money for conference and travel for our teachers. The increase here, the majority of the increase is specifically coming from our insurance increases. So our cybersecurity insurance, our umbrella insurance policy for the district. Those different insurance policies are increasing, leading to that 11.73%. Materials and supplies here, similar to on the capital side with buildings and grounds, looking to keep this number the same with no increase. This includes things such as copy paper for the district and postage when we pay for things to be mailed and sent out from the district. Those go into the materials and supplies. And then the last number on this screen, the BOE services, increasing at 0.96%. This includes everything from state aid planning to some of our software. So for example, Envision, that produces a lot of the lovely reports you folks see for finance of the district. Those are in that BOE services number. And this increase is really just from regular year-to-year increases for those different services. Any questions about administrative component? Okay, moving right along. So the third section tonight is looking at our revenue projections and where they currently stand for next year. A summary slide that shows overall the breakdown of our current revenue projections, so a pie chart. Here, if you look at very clearly, there are two main categories: the state aid on the left-hand side, which is approximately 44%, and real estate taxes on the right-hand side, we round up to 51%. There are other smaller pieces of the pie, local sources of just over 3%, and appropriated fund balance at 2.32. The focus here, though, that we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about each side is the state aid piece and the real estate taxes, because putting those two together make up about 95% of our overall revenue for the budget.
Todd, are you basing this on the 1.83?
Correct, yeah. So this is all based on the tax cap amount of 1.83% increase for real estate taxes. So this slide, lots of information on here because this is the overall breakdown of all of our different revenue sources and revenue numbers. So this shows overall the revenue, so that pie chart just in chart form, looking at all the different lines. If you look at the bottom, this is a 4.25% increase overall, and that's roughly 1.5 million increase in revenue from this current year to next year. To highlight just a couple of these, if you notice where it says real estate taxes, that increase, to Angela's question, shows that it's $341,000. That's the 1.83%. There's the tax cap number in there showing what that increase is from. Other increases, the pilot payment. So these are agreements that have been set up for 15 years, payment in lieu of taxes. So we get a set amount each year, the amount going up slightly next year, so there's a 2% increase there. Interest on deposits going up $10,000, so different conversations with the board that we've had this year and looking at our interest earnings from the amount that is currently in our accounts. So working with Melanie as our treasurer and really reviewing where we've been previous years. While this year we have taken in more revenue because of interest, part of that was the interest rates that were high. Those interest rates are coming down. They're not where they were even back in September, October. Even with that, we were comfortable to say we can increase the revenue there by $10,000. Not a huge figure, but feel comfortable with where we currently are and looking at utilizing the different banks and NICLAS, that we can increase that slightly by $10,000. The next big number of an increase is state aid at 9.11%, which is over 1.3 million. I'm going to break that down on some future slides, so we'll come back and revisit that. And then the last change here is interfund transfer. So this is 205,000. We had 205,000 this current year, going down to 0 next year. This is another area where this is connected to our current capital project. So we knew that in this current year, from a couple slides ago, we were going to have to pay that $400,000 in interest. In the design of this current project, it was decided to pull $205,000 in this first year that we were going to have to pay interest, specifically from a reserve. So this is a reserve, it's debt service. It's money that was previously earned by the district from project money that was borrowed. And while we held that money, we were earning interest on it. That goes into an account that we can only use for the purpose of debt service. Meaning we can only use it to pay down debt that we would be taking on. So again, this was all part of working with Dunnigan's office and our fiscal advisors in terms of the creation of this current project. All very intentional of how to use that $205,000 in just this first year as kind of like an on-ramp to help offset the costs initially coming into the budget for the capital project. And that was all part of when this capital project was put out, showing that it would be 0 increase overall for taxpayers, keeping that tax responsibility of the taxpayers flat. Part of it was because we pulled the $205,000 for this current year to pay that interest. So next year, that's going to 0 because next year we're getting that aid. Back to that building aid piece, because that aid is coming in next year, that's picking up the tab, so to speak, to pay for the principal and interest for the capital project.
Before you go on,
Yep.
go over what's going on with the top two on your chart there.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Sorry, I skipped that. So I did an assigned appropriated planned and unplanned. So the overall amount is staying the same. If you total up those two columns, the total amount has been the same. I believe this will be the 4th or 5th year where that amount is the same. Just looking at what has truly been in the budget as planned assigned appropriated versus unplanned, I wanted to reflect what the true numbers really were. So what that means is $605,000. When we put the money from this current year into next year's budget, there are very specific places where $605,000 are appropriated and planned in specific codes throughout the budget. The other amount, which for next year I have shown is $266,000, is additional fund. It's not planned in any specific code. We're just pulling it from this current year into next year's to help balance the budget overall. So the total amount is not changing. It's just better reflecting what has actually happened over the past couple of years.
I have a question then.
Yeah.
So if it's a planned fund balance, doesn't that mean you can only use it for certain things?
No, not necessarily. Being planned means it is actually assigned in a specific code in the budget. Unplanned just means it's additional funds that we're pulling from this year into next year to balance the overall budget.
So where we're seeing, so because this is revenue, so where we're seeing
Yep.
some of those increases in other line items, that's accounted for in this figure.
These two figures would be separate from everything else on the chart. Overall, this is all money that is in this current year budget that we're pulling from this current year into next year. So the plan is always, the example that we use is, it helps with cash flow over the summer, right? You always want some money. We don't want to get to the end of this year and truly spend out every last dollar that the district has. We always want to have some money that keeps cash flow going, helps us pay summer bills. So that's really that 605 amount. That's in very specific budget lines throughout the budget. As opposed to the unplanned, it's just, this was several years ago, that number was picked to help balance the budget. We've been in a place the past couple of years, ideally it'd be great to bring that number down, so we're not relying on money from one year to balance the budget in the next. But we've been in a place where we're just keeping that the same year to year.
Thanks for that, Todd.
Yeah.
So along the same line of thought, how much are we funding for our reserves out of the 25-26 budget?
Out of reserves is,
No, not coming out of the reserves that we have, or from the current year budget. How much is in your planned 25-26 budget that's going to go into reserves?
going to go into reserves as an expenditure?
Yeah.
0.
Okay. That has not been past practice, right?
It has. So the reserves, if you're talking about like at the end of the year, so last year, for example, at the end of last year, we had remaining funds at the end of the year. We put a significant amount into a capital reserve. That wasn't planned early on in the year. It wasn't planned as part of the development of last year's budget. It was at the end of the year assessing where we were with funds overall and identifying we have remaining funds in this year's budget, more than what we need for appropriated fund balance to carry over into the following year, so we can put some of that into reserve accounts.
Right, and that's always, as I recall, just under 4%.
Two different numbers. So the 4% is the unassigned fund balance that you can just hold for, call it a rainy day fund. That's separate from very specific defined reserves. So the defined reserves that we have the capital reserve, we have TRS, Teacher Retirement System Reserve.
Right.
That would be used, they're very specific defined reserves, and then there's the unappropriated fund balance, which is just the 4%. You can't go over the 4%.
So we're in March now, and this is a projected ask, I guess, because I don't think you have the number. But we certainly will have money left over from 24-25.
Correct.
To do the same thing. Maybe not in the same amount we had last year, but maybe more, maybe less. But do you have any idea?
I do. I don't have specific figures to share tonight. It's less than last year.
Okay.
Some of that is, in this current year, one of the reasons we will have end-of-year funds is that goes back to the interest. What we were earning in interest early on in the year was very positive. That was above and beyond what we had planned in revenue, and we did not have it on the expenditure side a plan to spend it down. So that's a perfect example of great, at the end of this current year, those additional revenues, let's put that, my recommendation, put more into a capital reserve, which helps with the next future project that we need to do. But I don't think it will be where it was last year.
And there's no way that we can forecast that to aid with 25-26.
I mean, there's no,
Yeah.
the best we do is in all of our budget lines reviewing what did we spend this past year, what do we project that we're going to spend next year, and let's budget in that account what we think we need for that budget line.
But as far as revenue, we could make some assumptions that we are going to have some money left over from 24-25, and then accentuate 25-26 budget through a reserve transfer into the budget, and then backfill it with the remains of 24, 25, correct?
Yes, if I'm understanding your question, could we increase the assigned appropriate fund balance for next year's budget to balance it? The answer is yes. The challenge with that is always, you're using one year to finance the next year. If you're very defined in what your expenditures are going to be, at some point you're going to run out of money to keep carrying over year to year. And again, I'll use the interest example. While we earned additional revenue this year in interest, there's no guarantee that we'll earn that next year. And even if we do earn some next year, there's no guarantee long term, so we don't want to commit those funds to something that we know are an ongoing expense every single year, as opposed to a one-time expense of, Rich always has things that we need to do paving, or, well, tractor's different, that's equipment. He would love to just buy a tractor whenever he could, but no, there's rules for that. But it could be, paving the parking lots. We have end of year funds, we're going to pave the parking lots. We've done that in the past. That's a one-time cost that we're committing at this time. We have these funds for this very specific purpose. We're going to spend it out one time, we're good. As opposed to pulling fund balance into next year to support salaries or to support benefits, that gets more challenging year to year because it's not a one-time expense. Good?
Good.
Okay. All right, so as I said, we're going to look at each side, the state aid side a little bit closer, and then also the taxes side. So on the state aid side, a couple of slides just to look at some data over a 5-year period. So this goes back to 21-22 school year, and it goes up to incorporating next year as an estimated figure. So this is overall total amount projected what we will receive in state aid next year and comparing it to each year. So just graph on the left and a chart on the right, showing that next year, looking at 16.5 million in state aid, and that's an increase of 8.23%.
And that's the estimate figuring we're going to get that come April.
Did come April?
Once the budget's known and so forth.
Yeah. What do you mean? Say that again.
Well, it's an estimate. It's not, I wouldn't say that's, we're projecting what's going to happen, but we don't know what's going to happen with April, the governor's office. What they decide on the budget.
Correct, sorry. You were saying budget, I'm thinking our budget. Yes,
No,
the
no,
state
the
budget in
governor's
April, yes. Thank you, Eric, yes. Yes, this is all projected as of right now, using the governor's budget. Speaking of which, here's the governor's proposal. So on the right-hand side, the different areas of state aid. So when we talk about state aid, foundation aid is the largest amount. We're going to look at that a little closer in a minute, but that is for each student that we have, we get a specific set amount for that student. It goes into foundation aid. It's the largest portion of our state aid overall. In addition to foundation aid, there's these other categories, some of which are expenditure driven, meaning what we spend in this year's budget influences what we're actually going to get back next year in state aid. So these numbers are what the governor's proposal put out. I go through each one of these and assess for the ones that are expenditure driven. Let me use what we're currently spending in this 24-25 budget to do my projection. And Quest R3 State Aid Planning does a lot of support in this area. They create spreadsheets and formulas that help you project these different numbers. So, for example, the last bullet point up there, the governor's proposal has overstated transportation aid. So when I take what we're actually projected to spend in this current year for transportation, put it into the formula, what I'm projecting for aid that we'll get for transportation is less than what the governor's proposal had. And there's some other examples in there as well, but just one example is transportation. This next slide takes that same information. So the start of this chart has those different categories of state aid, has the proposal from the executive budget from the governor, but then it shows what our current 24-25 budget is for state aid, and the proposed, what my recommendations are, what my projections are in some of these areas. So again, if you look at transportation aid, it's a slight increase over this current year, but what I'm projecting is actually lower than what the governor's proposal projected. On the flip side, if you look at the bottom two, public high cost and private excess cost, So these are related to student placements of students that are in either Questar or BOCES specialized programs or in private placements with private entities. We get different rates of aid back for those different students. Well, we currently in-house have a way better accurate information of what we're spending out this current year for those students. So for public high cost, the governor's proposal had $91,976. Well, I'm more confident that I can use what we're currently paying for our students for these programs and can project that we're actually going to get closer to $108,290. So just so you have an understanding of why some of these numbers are different, it's because of that expense-driven aid idea and using what our current numbers are telling us about 24, 25. Putting this, oh no, one other just to speak to specifically, to Kelly's question earlier, this is where it does break out building aid. So if you look at building aid, this is where we know we're going to finish this current project and increase the amount of aid that we're getting. So the overall increase from this year to next year for building aid is just under $1 million, $999,326. The vast majority of that is from this current capital project and getting that first full year of aid in next year's budget. Put that all together, it's a $1.379 million increase for next year, or 9.11%. All right, digging a little deeper, and hopefully this looks familiar to some because we did this last year as well, but I think it's important as a reminder since we're talking about state aid. The foundation formula comes from two numbers, but those numbers are actually made up of a whole bunch of other numbers. So it's a lot of numbers that go into other numbers that eventually get to a pupil count, which is TAPU. I think I remember Angela enjoying that acronym. So it comes down to TAPU, which is total aidable foundation pupil units. It is a weighted number of students that we have at Greenville, and then a per pupil amount. So the simplest form of thinking about the foundation formula is per pupil you get this amount, and this is how many pupils you're getting money for. You multiply them together, and you get the foundation aid amount on the right-hand side.
I have a question.
Yes.
So why is it going up when we have less people, less student, or lower student account for next year?
So some of that is the per pupil amount. That per pupil amount increases every year.
Okay.
So even though the total amount of students might not be increasing, the amount we get for each student increases, so the total overall is increasing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I couldn't help myself. I had to multiply those numbers.
Yeah?
And it didn't match. So we'll just leave it at that.
I don't like that.
I know, and I just figured it was a rounding error.
No, it shouldn't be a rounding error.
All right, and then
Okay, I'll check that.
and then TAPU. It's a number. It's a count. I don't think it has a dollar sign in front of it.
You are correct. So that's where the error is. That number is off.
I'll look at that. Have a good day.
Thank you. Much appreciated. It's all good. For purposes of this, this is the foundation aid formula. Put the two numbers, multiply them together, and you get the foundation aid amount. However, if you hear hold harmless, the idea of hold harmless is the idea that every district in the state will get a minimum of 2% increase. So the other way of calculating foundation aid is taking the current year, how much we're receiving in this current year, and adding to it a 2% increase and figuring that total. So that amount comes out at $10,566,946. So,
And just so you know, crunching the other number, that's still the winner.
good. So the winner being, whichever one of these two is higher is what districts get. So last year, if you remember, there was a lot of conversation at the state level and the governor talking about hold harmless going away, meaning districts would not get that higher amount. That conversation has not been happening this year. It's been very quiet. If anything, it's been, no, we're going to keep hold harmless, meaning these two formulas will remain, and the higher of the two is what districts get. So that's even in the governor's proposal, that 10,566,946 is the number that we are projected to get. So hold harmless, where we had some conversation last year and we talked about we are not a hold harmless district. This year, for 25-26, technically we would be. It's pretty close, right? It's $6,000, just over $6,000 difference, but we're getting a little extra or a little more than what the formula says we would get if we just use that straight formula. So then just looking at a couple other things, again, we looked at this last year, so I thought it was important to include these and just update numbers. Another variable that goes into that formula is called the foundation aid state sharing ratio. This is based on a district's wealth, so the wealth of the community that the district is in. That includes property values, it also includes income of members in the community. For the purpose of this slide, a higher ratio results in a higher per pupil dollar amount. So last year when we had this conversation, we talked about, oh, our number actually went up from 0.518 to 0.524. That slight increase meant we got a little bit more for every single student last year. This year, that number is going down. So just overall, it impacts our formula, so we get a little less overall because this number has gone down.
Do you know how they, you said property values and what else?
So it's property values and it's also income.
Based off what?
Based on income tax returns.
Okay, so it had nothing to do like if with no one needing to do the free and reduced lunch forms and all that stuff?
Good question. So there's an element of that in the formula. I don't believe that that plays into this number. I think that plays into another number somewhere else. I have to check on that to be 100% sure. So when we look at it overall, the amount that we get per pupil, we are still getting more each year. It's a steady increase each year, how much we receive per pupil. It's just, if you put these different numbers together, if that previous number had not gone down, that 7,904 that we're getting per pupil next year would probably be even higher, would be slightly higher, which means overall we would get more money. But again, just I think good to look at historical data over 5 years to look at some trends. And then this TAPU comes back into play here, just a chart that shows the red line on the bottom is our true enrollment, so how many students we served in that year. And then the line above is that TAPU, which is weighted. So for example, every special ed student that we have, we get additional points. So that number is a weighted number of our enrollment, hence TAPU. Put this all together and it gives us our actual foundation aid that we receive. If you look back at 21-22 and 22-23, the gray line here shows what the state formula was saying we should receive as a district, and the red line is showing what we actually received. So technically in those years, we were underfunded by the state. The state technically owed us more money. We're not getting that money for the record, but we were not getting what the formula said we should get as a district. In the 23-24 school year, it was the first year that districts across the state were, if you were on formula, you were getting the amount that the formula said you should get. So that held true for last year, it held true for this current year, and then for next year, and very close, but slightly, the number that we will receive is slightly higher than what the formula would give us by that $6,000. But trends overall, you can see state aid certainly does increase every year over these 5 years. So that just comes back to this, where again, I apparently have a number wrong that I will check. Thank you for letting me know, Aaron. The two numbers on the right are correct. The 10,560,065 and then the 10,566,946. And we will, as of right now, the projections, we will receive that number in the bottom right corner for foundation aid. The other side of that pie chart from earlier was the tax levy and real estate taxes that we collect as a district to support our budget. So the tax cap limit that we shared last week based on the formula is at 1.83. So the budget that we presented and the revenue that we've been talking about is using that tax cap amount of 1.83. This slide is just showing on the left-hand side a graph of the percentage increase over those 5 years. Last year we were at 2.5. This year, because of that tax cap formula, the most we can go out at currently and only need a simple majority is 1.83.
Do you need an answer from us tonight or direction from us tonight on that number, even though there's only 4 of us? I mean, we can make a decision or wait till the next meeting.
So it would be good for us to gather some thoughts from folks, absolutely. The final decision won't be until you adopt the budget, right, when you vote on the budget, which is scheduled to be at the April meeting. But certainly would be good to have some, for us to have some thoughts from you as a board of where you're thinking in line, or in terms of that 1.83.
Are you guys ready to comment on that? Should we wait? Should we do it now?
You can do it now.
Dave?
John, I don't know if it was during your rollover presentation in December or the meeting that followed that, you had a chart that showed a progression of tax levy percentage. You have that available on the screen?
I don't know what
Where the bottom one was the 1.3 and,
It's a couple of slides forward.
is it?
Oh, showing what the deficit would be in each number?
Yeah.
Yes, I have that. So actually, Angela, if it's okay, let's wait until we get to that part, because we'll finish up this revenue, and then we'll go into where we stand overall. And we're almost there. So this slide shows just the percentage increase in the tax levy. Same data, just a different graph showing the total dollar value over 5 years, the end trend of increasing the tax levy each year. This, we've touched on a lot of this already, but this pulls out not the state aid side, which is looking at the local revenue side, the different areas that we have revenue on the local side. So the main changes here we've already talked about. This just pulls out just the local side. So here you'll see it's an overall decrease of 8.76%. That's mainly because of that interfund transfer that I mentioned earlier. We pulled that money for this current year, but not pulling it for future years. That money doesn't exist because we spent it this year. That was a one-time thing. So that finishes the revenue side. Brings us to where are we overall? So we've gone through the 3 components of the budget: program, capital, administrative. So where are we with the preliminary budget as it stands today, March 3rd, versus where we were a week ago? As I mentioned a week ago, a lot changes in a day, certainly a lot changes in a week in budget development this time of year. So what are some of the updates and changes in the budget from last Monday's meeting to tonight? The first one is review and updating of revenue projections. So specifically in transportation, while we are receiving less than what the governor's budget projected, I had done one calculation and got one number. This past week I went through all that again and reviewed it and got some additional numbers from Mary and updated it, and that number shifted in a direction positive that we would be receiving slightly more revenue than I had projected. So that was one area that was a good. Review and updating of teacher retirement system. The word system should actually be in their projections. So the New York State teacher retirement system puts out percentages. We get draft percentages. I think the original ones come out really November, December. Last week we got updated percentages that were slightly lower, which means I could bring down the number for teacher retirement. So that was a positive, helped close the gap slightly from where we were last year. And then the third item up there, review of open positions. So this is part of our process every year in the budget cycle. Any positions that are open from retirement or somebody leaving the district, reviewing those positions and determining if all positions are needed and if they can all be supported by the budget. So in doing that, making the decision of some positions not being filled for next year. So all those go into the numbers that are on this slide. So this is what you were thinking of, Dave. With a 1.83 tax levy percent increase, we would be at a tax levy of $18,983,830, and still that would be at a deficit of $216,360. So last week when we presented, I think we were at 484,000 down to 216. That's from those items that I mentioned, the open positions not being filled, the teacher retirement system number coming down, and the revenue on transportation going up. Kind of as the major shifts from one week to the next.
Can you share what the thoughts are on those positions?
Want me to share?
Yep.
So the open positions that we are looking to not fill, there are two. One is in the PE department. So looking at total PE class size and numbers for this current year and looking at schedules, we feel confident that we can not fill that PE position, make some shifts in that department, and not have an impact on students or program. And then the other one is at the high school with some shifts in our current strong program and social studies department not filling one of the positions that are at the high school.
Not impacting class sizes or the strong program in terms of their support.
Correct. And some of the decision at the high school level is also data-driven for what students in those programs need in terms of support and where they're struggling the most. So it will actually help benefit in some other areas because the support in that program will shift from one content to math, which is, we've seen in our data, an area that those students struggle and would benefit from additional support.
And then the other open positions,
The plan currently is those would be filled.
and those were already factored in with the breakage and everything.
Yes, yes. In terms of breakage, so another opening is an elementary classroom position. The breakage from that retirement to the replacement of hiring somebody new was already factored into last week's. It's already there.
Mike, if you don't mind, could you remind me of the positions that are, well, the folks that are retiring in those positions, and then a brief overview of what they're doing for us, for the students this year?
So one was a PE teacher who is retiring. One was a social studies teacher that was retiring. Those are the two positions that we're not filling for next year. So as we mentioned, one of the things that we took a look at was schedules, class size, talked with each of those departments to talk about what the plan was, and then to be able to move some of our current at the high school, as Todd mentioned, to fill an area of need from the strong program was to take some math support and put that into the strong program where we could then potentially move the strong person who's in there into the social studies department. So they will maintain the same level of courses and opportunities in the social studies department. It's just a matter of shifting around some personnel.
Those are the only two retirements?
No, and then we have an elementary school retirement that we will be looking to fill. Those are the three?
The three teachers.
The three teachers, yeah.
And then, so you've shifted things around and you're comfortable with what we're doing for the students next year without those positions?
I am. And again, anytime we do this, and this goes back to every year around this time when we have retirements, we take a look at where is the need for the district. Because we've got a responsibility for two things. One, to make sure our programs are still strong for our kids, make sure that we are putting our kids into positions in which they have opportunities, but also to be fiscally wise in regards to making those decisions about just not hiring. One of the things that we're very aware of as we go into the budget is not a year-to-year outlook. We have to look years down the road. So we spent some time, this goes back to, I can only speak to the time that I've been here with the COVID positions and some of the things that we've added. Each year we took a look at, where are we at, project out 1, 2, 3 years so that we have a better understanding of where we're at from a budgetary standpoint. and a programmatic standpoint. So again, every time we get into a position where there is a retirement, we take a look at, analyze, what is the impact of the decisions or things that we're thinking about, and does it have a negative impact or a neutral impact on program and students?
Including this year, it'll be 3 years in a row that we've cut teacher positions, correct?
We haven't filled, we haven't cut, we have not laid off anyone.
I understand that, right, so no one's feelings get hurt, but the positions are not filled, and then they're not funded.
Correct.
And therefore the savings.
Yep.
How do we look at any other positions throughout the district?
Again, every year when we take a look at retirements, we take a look at benefit to programs and systems and to students. And so what we do is we analyze each one of those positions and we take a look at, okay, what does this do for impact on programs? How does it impact on systems? And we have a cabinet discussion around just that. And we have a conversation around, okay, can we live with this position? Can we live without this position? What would this mean if we're going to not fill a position? And so we analyze those things, take a look at it to make decisions that are making sure that overall we are doing what's best for, what we feel is best for our programs and for our kids.
All right. I would just like to remind the board members that are here that I feel the purpose of this campus is to educate kids. And I believe that that's done with teachers.
And you are correct. And again, I want to reiterate that as we take a look at this, programs are not being affected by these decisions. Their kids are having the same level of opportunities moving forward based on these decisions. So, I want the board to recognize that, those are the types of things that we're taking a look at every time we make these decisions.
Mike, I know for PE, I think you said it would increase each class by maybe 2 to 3 students, but how does this impact the social studies department?
It really has a neutral impact on the social studies department because they will have the same amount of teachers in that spot. Like I said, when we take a look at this, we take a look at personnel and how we can utilize those personnel. And again, for the PE department, there will be some movement within personnel. We don't know what that looks like right now. But again, as we take a look at impact, as we all know, our class sizes have been going down. We have maintained the same level of staff to provide programming for our kids. And as we took a look at our retirements, as we do, we realized that by condensing one section within the current structure of the master schedule, program doesn't change, offering doesn't change, but class sizes would increase 3 to 4 students.
So with the PE department, we've offered an elective or 2 the last couple of years. Those are not affected by the loss of a teacher?
Correct. Like I said, what we will do is we will reestablish or reassign to make sure that we are able to cover and have no impact on students at the high school and the elementary school.
How does this impact the shift within the STRONG program? You said math. So how does that impact that department?
So what that does is it allows us to put some additional support in the STRONG program for the students who struggle with math. In the contract for teachers, they're provided a certain amount of preps. What this does is actually frees up an opportunity for our teachers to kind of take on a little bit more in regards to what they're able to teach. So we will be able to continue to offer almost the identical programming that we have this year. And again, it's because of contractual preps that they're allowed. This will allow us to utilize teachers and be able to offer the same programs. Any other questions?
Look at this slide on the screen in front of us. And your preliminary total budget amount now, is it the 37,514?
Yeah, no, appropriation is
That's it right there.
37,730. Yep, so those are the, as of right now, everything that we presented tonight, budget, where it stands, appropriations, expenditures, the middle number, and then the deficit.
Okay, so on your rollover, you were at 38,048, right?
If you're looking at something and that's the number, I will trust that you are correct. I can pull it up.
Your information. I'm just wondering.
Yes, rollover was 38,048.
So we're at least, 200,000 down from that. Or more.
So rollover was 38, 300-ish.
Okay. Where does the chunk of that, or multiple chunks come from?
A good portion of that.
It's just new information that came in.
It is, correct. So, some of it was on that debt service side. So the supporting document tonight that is the different colors across the top that shows like the different versions of the budget. If you look at this, you could actually find from the rollover to today, where are those numbers changing? In debt service, some of that was the numbers that I used in the rollover were very conservative because we were still working with, at that time, Dunnigan's office to kind of lock in where are we going to be with interest rates, what's the projected payments for the capital project that will happen in next year's budget. So a good portion of that shifted as a result of those debt service conversations.
To my memory, and I was trying to find it, but last year, at this point, we were in the 100,000 range as a deficit. We came back to the fourth meeting and some school finance magic had occurred and we were good to go.
Well, so that's different. So last year at this time, I think we were around 90,000. So yes, roughly 100,000.
Okay.
What this slide looked like a year ago. What the potential things that we're still looking to change, hopefully to our benefit. One is health insurance. Final health insurance rates we should have by the end of March. So that's one area that hopefully, if that rate comes in even a percentage point lower than what I currently have in the budget, that will free up some money. I have a list of this. Give me a minute, Dave.
I have a really hard question for you next.
Well, then I'm going to stall for a minute. So things that we're still waiting for. The insurance was one. Oh, the other is fuel bid. So the fuel bid process, we actually use DCMO BOCES. They coordinate the bid process, put it out, and collect bids, and then we have a decision to go with what they've gotten for bids. I'd have to go back and see when it was last year, but I think it's a little later this year, so we're still waiting. The bid opening is supposed to be later this week. So I'm hoping that when the fuel bid comes in, if those numbers are good numbers, that potentially we could shave off some money in the budget around fuel. And then the last area that I'm working currently with the principals on is back to the conversation about end of year funds. Are there some areas, textbook is always a good one. So we have some increased requests for textbook in next year's budget. Are there things in there that we can purchase with remaining funds this year so I can pull down some of those numbers in next year's budget? Same for supplies. If we have remaining supply money, let's not increase the supply lines next year. On the instructional side, let's buy stuff in advance and use current year funds to do that. So those are the different areas that in the next week, 2-3 weeks, looking for those numbers to come in so we can firm up our expenditure side.
Because I get up so early in the morning, I have nothing else to do. I went through the 8 steps of calculating our tax levy cap. You look at me like, wow. Which of those factors was the biggest thing that drove basically our allowable number down?
So, in the supporting document on the very last page is a summary chart that shows the tax cap calculation for 25-26. The item in here that I have to play around with the formula to see, but my hunch is that the one item that had a significant impact is tax-based growth factor. So this is a number that is given to us by the state. If you ask me what goes into it, I'd have to do some research. But it's a number that's given to us by the state, by school district. Our number last year in that area was higher. It's one of those things that didn't change drastically, but a slight change. So the tax-based growth factor last year for the creation of this current year's budget was 1.0068. In this current year, for projecting for next year, it just went down to 1.0000. That slight change in the formula if I change that 1.000 back to what it was last year, which we can't do because the number is given to us by the state, but if that number had remained the same as last year, we would be at a tax cap increase of 2.5. So right there, that single, my hunch was correct, that single factor changing is really the driving force behind the tax percentage increase being lower.
The other thing that I was hoping that the other board members picked up on this, when Chris was giving his presentation to us, that we've always tried to be cognizant of what the taxpayers might find acceptable, but that has actually hurt us. If you look at his calculations, not being right at the cap, the maximum possible tax levy, and as it filtered on down through the years, it actually ended up hurting us. And on converse to that, I look at this chart and I suppose, yeah, I'd like to go, I don't want to go right to the max, I'd like to suggest a little bit different number. But it always works out that the beast likes to get fed. So I don't know, Angela, to answer your question, I don't know if I'm ready to we can discuss the allowable tax cap, but I'm comfortable with your feelings about, there's only 4 of us here tonight, so, but if Todd would like some guidance, and then he could actually, well, we wouldn't be able to get their input unless they're sitting with us. So that's why you're in that chair.
So I don't mind talking. Yeah, and thank you again for reminding us that the tax base growth factor did have a big impact in terms of the allowable. And Dave is totally correct that when you don't come to the top of your levy, which is the way the state figures things should be happening, it has an impact a few years later. So yes, we went over the curve and now we're kind of in an awkward position to try to do catch up. But I still believe we did right in the past because of what we did for our taxpayers. So it's fighting us now. My personal thought is that I think, and I cautiously say this, that it would be nice to be able to pick a bigger number, like 2%, but I don't think that there's any reason to go out and ask for the supermajority vote. It's just, when I look at the difference between that number and a little bit more, I go, you still have to cut out 260 for thousands. And I think that if we just stick at 1.83, it'll help us in the future with the way the ringing is happening for the formula. And you still have to go find the 216 to reduce some expenses. If you could magically find it in income, that would be better, I guess, from your perspective. But I don't think you're going to find it in the income this year.
Can you find on the revenue side?
Right. Yeah. So,
I've been trying.
so my personal thought right now is that the 1.83 tax levy cap, I think, is the right thing to do. It's below 2%, and it will certainly help us in the future when the formulas come back from the state.
I have so many thoughts, but I won't do that to you. I am not comfortable going out of the supermajority, so my absolute max is the 1.83. I appreciate you showing us what the zero looks like, and I don't want to create busy work for you, but I'm not a numbers percentage geek, sorry. I'm the one on the board that's more relational and pictures and all that stuff. I think it would be really good going forward, and I mentioned this to Tracy, I don't know if it got back to you guys. I would like to know what these numbers represent. For us to cut 216,000 versus 557,000, I think it's good for our community to hear what that represents, how many positions or the entire athletic program. That's what most people are going to relate to. So if they know that this is what we're sitting here struggling with, it may help with that increase yet again in their taxes. When my husband and I sit down to do our budget in our household, we talk about, well, if we cut this and we do this and we move that. But we do it with tangible, like, this is how it affects us. I think that seems to help a little more. Just a thought for the future.
Okay.
Or for the budget newsletter or anything like that. 1.83, I'd be okay with saying yes to. I don't want to see it come from kids. And I know that everything here does affect the kids. But we asked you guys to tighten last year. I don't know where you're going to get it from. I'm sorry. That's your job. I'm glad it's not mine. But I'd like to see us not keep cutting the same things over and over and tightening the same areas over and over.
Dave?
So I have a couple more questions. So, and I just tried to find what probably easier just to ask you. At the current number that we're at there, the 37.7, that is percentage-wise increase from last year's what? And then the dollar amount is what?
So budget to budget, if we're, so comparing current 24-25 to 25-26?
Yeah.
Is that your question? So it is an increase. Make sure I'm in the right spot. Increase of 1.744416, and that's a 4.85% increase. 1.744416.
That's a 4.
4.85.
Is that in this document?
It's the very last line of that document, correct? The preliminary budget as of 3/3/25.
What would be, I don't know if you have this, or you can share it later, but what would be the deficit if we added back those two instructional positions?
I think I saw that was like 126 or 126,000.
I don't have the exact number. I can get it for you.
Okay.
The salaries is roughly, Angela's correct, the salary is roughly 125,000. Benefits is roughly another 50,000. And then you have to factor in TRS. Yes, the significant portion that got us from 44 to 216 were those positions. The other things I mentioned are pieces, but the majority.
Would you say it's, well, the breakage, I mean, these are folks that are up on the salary schedule, right? So the savings.
Correct.
And
The breakage was factored in already,
Right.
prior to,
the breakage to zero, right? Their salary to zero. That's the breakage you got to trade in.
well, but in last week, what was presented last week, it was breakage from what their salary was to what we project for a new teacher coming in, replacement.
So you decided to not replace these this week?
Correct, from last week's presentation to this week, it was now reduced that to zero. So
All right.
overall, from current year to next year, yes, the breakage is their current salary down. But from last week to this week, it was only the portion. If that makes sense.
I am, Angela asked me, so I am comfortable with the 1.83, but any savings that you find along the way between here and our next meeting, I would really like to see at least one of those base positions restored, even if it includes some more fund transfer, or anything that is like that. And I'm not going to decide. That's not my job. I'd like to have them both restored. Actually, I agree with what Kelly said. If we're down in population, and that's our student population, and that's our gives us the ability to cut teaching positions, there's also other factors that come in there that are also connected to a decrease in student population. So any avenue toward restoring one or both of those positions would make me feel very comfortable, knowing all that positions I took in the last two budgets.
Well, the negotiator in me wants to say 1.7, but I'm okay with 1.83. I think that we've cut it down in the past few years and we've been happy with that decision, but I think it's time to go in at that amount. So I'm totally comfortable with that. Unless you find extra dollar bills and then we can go even lower.
Keep it posted.
Mike or Todd, do you know what our history, I know we have, or maybe Daphne knows this, our history on the budget results, would we normally make the 60%?
If you give me a few minutes and keep talking, I have a history sheet of all the budget votes which failed.
You keep talking while she looks.
Filibuster.
I will share it with you, how about that?
Okay.
The document.
I mean, it's not our position yet, but certainly if suggestions for other cuts were needed, I think that the 4, 5, 6, 7 of us could come up with other ideas.
Right, if there's no other questions, we'll stall and Daphne can look and she finds that she can share. But just bringing us to our last slide for tonight, back to where we started at the beginning, just giving an overview of the remaining budget cycle. So we will be back on April 7th. The plan is on April 7th for the board to adopt the budget that will then go up for a vote in May. The key pieces, as I mentioned before, is, and we will continue to update the board between now and then as well. If we get that health insurance number, what does that do? If we are able to shift and purchase some things this year, what does that do to those numbers? We'll continue to update. But April 7th is the next time we're back here as a group to look at the budget. And then May 6th is our annual budget hearing with our budget vote on May 20th. That's all I have.
Should I move on?
From what I can find on the sheet that goes back to 2001, actually 1996, anytime we really put a high number out there, it was defeated and it went for a budget revote. And the highest ones were like, that highest one was 9.58, was a budget revote for 8.25.
Any more discussion? Don't know if that's on. Anyone else? I'd like a motion to adjourn. No. Open forum. The same rules apply at the beginning of the meeting. Does anyone wish to speak? Okay, now I'd like a motion to adjourn. Nobody wants to
Need a
leave?
second. Dave. Nobody wants to go home.
He's staying. All in favor?